Welcome everyone to Gamer Melt. As you can see, I'm in a different place, and that's because I'm in Las Vegas for AMD's RDNA 3 launch event. And it happened. AMD announced their RX 7000 GPUs. They shared release date, pricing, performance, and more. But before I get to that, I'll have affiliate links to the GPUs down in the description below for when they're released. It doesn't cost you anything more, and it helps the channel out. And really quickly, before I get to it, I actually recorded this entire thing, got the SD card, stuck it in, and the file was corrupted. So I decided, because I don't have a lot of time before the embargo's up, and I really want to get this information out as quickly as I can, I'm just going to go ahead and basically show the slides. I have all the slides that I was covering and discussing, and my mouse moving and all of that. You just won't be able to see me kind of down in the corner talking. So it's going to be a little bit different from my normal video, but this way I still have all the information and everything presented, and I can get this out as quickly as I can. Anyway, let's get right to it. Okay, starting things off, as you can see, the leaks yet again have been incredibly accurate. This is in fact the world's first MCM gaming GPU. And you can see, just like the leak suggested, it comes with one GCD, which is the graphics die. So this is your compute units, all of those good things, you know, your cores, things like that. Then you have the MCD, which is the memory cache die. The GPU die itself is 5 nanometers, and then the MCDs are 6 nanometers. You can see there's 6 right here with the GCD in the middle. Moving on, we can see that it has a whopping 61 teraflops of compute, 5.3 terabytes per second interconnect, 24 gigabytes of up to 24 gigabytes of GDDR6, and a whopping 58 billion transistors. And they initially set the goal of 50% performance per watt improvement over RDNA 2, yet they actually beat that goal, making it to 54%. We also see that they talk about the Infinity Cache right here. This is their second generation Infinity Cache. It gets upwards of 2.7 times the peak bandwidth when compared to RDNA 2. And they also went over their AV1 encode and decode. You can actually simultaneously encode decode. They actually went over a few things on this. It's pretty interesting. At one point, they actually mentioned that they're able to leverage both the Ryzen CPU and RX 7000 GPU to work on encoding and decoding together. Now, I do believe from the Q&A that was done after that, I do believe that it's effectively just using the CPU's iGPU, so it's not like the CPU itself is somehow helping with that, but obviously every little bit helps. And with that, we have all that little introductory stuff out of the way. Let's get to the GPUs themselves. And right off the bat, you can see the actual reference design is exactly like the one that was just recently leaked. It is flat, spot on, identical to the ones that I went over actually in my last video, I believe it was. And you'll also notice that we have the RX 7900 XT right here and the RX 7900 XTX. Once again, spot on with the leaks. The RX 7900 XTX is a 24 gigabyte GPU, while the regular XT is a 20 gigabyte GPU. And like I said, the reference designs spot on to what we just recently saw. So of course, if you like getting leaks early, being able to learn about GPUs and CPUs before they're ever announced, make sure to subscribe to GamerMel. And moving on to each individual GPU, first we have the 7900 XTX, which comes with 96 CUs, a gaming clock of 2.3 gigahertz, and of course, remember the gaming clock, that's not the actual boost clock, that's effectively what the clock is going to be while you're actually gaming, or more or less when it isn't overclocked. You can expect it to be around there when you're doing fairly intense tasks like gaming. Next, you can see it has the full 24 gigabytes of GDDR6, DisplayPort 2.1. Talk about leaks being spot on. We hadn't even heard of DisplayPort 2.1 when I actually covered the fact that a leaker mentioned DisplayPort 2.1. Then shortly after it was announced, and here we have it. Then finally, you can see 355 watt TBP. So obviously a much lower TBP versus say Nvidia's RTX 4090, but, well, don't want to do any spoilers, so I'll get to that in just a second. Moving on, we have the 7900 XT. This one has 84 CUs, gaming clock of 2 gigahertz, 20 gigabytes of GDDR6, once again still DisplayPort 2.1, and a TBP of 300 watts. Now, really quickly, they more or less kind of stress the fact that you don't have to have that new adapter or anything like that. These cards only require two 8-pin connectors, and the 8-pin connectors are on the card itself. 2.5 slot design, so it isn't like some of the wild, almost like quad slot designs that we've seen or anything like that. So the same kind of slot size as we saw with the 6950 XT. Then we have right here, this is really going to be a big push by them, is the DisplayPort 2.1. Remember, I actually covered this when it was initially leaked. Nvidia's RTX 4080 only has DisplayPort 1.4, and that actually has some very serious limitations, though it's probably only going to be for a very small minority group of people who will actually see that limitation and see it as an issue. Or should I say, who will actually bump into that limitation. You can see the bandwidth gets up to 54 gigabits per second, 12 bits per channel, color for up to 68 billion colors, for a whopping 4K 480 FPS or 8K 165 FPS. Wild amounts of bandwidth there, really impressive as far as the DisplayPort technology. And you can see here, they actually compared it to the DisplayPort 1.4 of the 6950 XT, but this is an issue with DisplayPort 1.4 in general, so that's obviously going to be a limitation on the RTX 4080 as well. You can see 8K up to 60 Hz, 4K up to 240 Hz, 1440p up to 480 Hz, and those are effectively doubled, moving over 8K 165, 4K 480, and 900 at 1440p. And with that, they actually announced the first 8K ultra wide from Samsung. It's the Odyssey Neo G9. So obviously a lot of people are like, well, who needs anything, 8K 165 Hz? So they're kind of trying to justify why DisplayPort 2.1 is important with these type of announcements. And moving on, while remaining in the vein of performance, they actually do have a new ray tracing accelerator. We can see this is their 2nd generation RT accelerator, and it means up to 50% more performance per CU. So pretty nice jump there. Nothing absolutely massive, but 50% is definitely impressive. Now, with that, we finally get into some real performance numbers. Well, in just one second, you can see right here, high refresh, 1440p. We're looking at Apex Legends. It reaches the cap of 300 FPS. This is once again at 1440p. Overwatch 2 reaches the cap of 600 FPS. And I believe they actually just upped that cap, and apparently this is able to reach it. Valorant, the cap of apparently 833 FPS was met. But anyway, when it comes to actual performance, we can see right here some pretty impressive numbers. This is with the RX 7900 XTX, and you can see it can actually play some games at 8K above the DisplayPort 1.4 limitations. You can see here 8K ultra wide, Death Stranding Director's Cut, it is able to get over that 135 Hertz limit of DisplayPort 1.4, and Modern Warfare 2, it gets all the way up to 190. Fairly impressive. Then we move over to just a regular 8K display. Uncharted reaches past it, which is 60 Hertz, 73 FPS, and then Assassin's Creed Valhalla all the way up to a whopping 96. Of course, with that said, you will probably notice that it does require FSR, but of course, I will say that Nvidia has been touting their DLSS all over the place with their RTX 4000 GPUs, so you can't really blame AMD for including it in here. Though, of course, I would really love to see more performance without FSR, just native performance, but we'll obviously be able to see that before long. Moving on to more gaming performance, once again showing the DisplayPort 1.4 limitations, this specifically in 4K. Hitman 3, 275 FPS, Modern Warfare 2, 306, 353, once again FSR. Now this is apparently without FSR, Apex Legends at 295 FPS, Overwatch 2 at 355, and Valorant at 704. Moving on, we actually have some comparisons from the 7900 XTX versus the 6950 XT. And as you can see, it does get a boost in ray tracing performance. We have ultra ray tracing settings for Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K, and it does get over 60 FPS. Then we have ultra ray tracing with Dying Light 2 Stay Human 72. Not a massive jump here from the 6950 XT, but it certainly is a big jump from the 6950 XT in Dying Light 2. Then Hitman 3, we got a whopping 89 FPS. And really quickly, you may have noticed that they are not comparing this to Nvidia's RTX 4090. It is a glaring omission, but during the Q&A, I believe it was Scott Herkelman who essentially admitted that the RX 7900 XTX is not meant to challenge Nvidia's RTX 4090. Unfortunately, I'll go ahead and say that, and I'll actually get to it a little bit more when I get to pricing. But yeah, you aren't going to see any comparisons with Nvidia's RTX 4090. With that said, I kind of found one. Unfortunately, I really didn't have a lot of time to do this because I was trying to get this video out for the embargo, and we only had a few hours to do it. But one comparison I found, let's see, Cyberpunk 2077, 62 FPS. When we look here, this is normal DLSS, not DLSS 3, which is a much better comparison to FSR, and you'll find out why in just 1 second. But you'll see 62 FPS versus 87. So it certainly is getting fairly close, especially when we're talking ray tracing performance here. But of course, it's kind of hard to do these comparisons. It's much better to have, the same CPU, to know exactly the settings, to know for sure that this is what we're comparing it to. But we can see that it is fairly close, 87 versus 62. I mean, I say fairly close. We're looking at maybe like 20% or so, 25% or so difference there, increase in performance versus the 7900 XTX. Either way, moving on, and this is what I was talking about right here. AMD announced today FSR 3.0. And with that announcement, they claim that FSR 3.0 gets up to 2 times more FPS versus FSR 2.0. And the reason for that is because just like Nvidia's DLSS 3.0, they are including frame generation. Now, I will say that during the Q&A after the event, they would not answer whether this requires AI, which to me, at least, almost definitively says that it does. So FSR 3.0, just like DLSS, could or likely will require certain cores in AMD's newer GPUs. We are still looking at upwards of 2 times more FPS when compared to FSR 2. So the massive gains you're seeing with DLSS 3.0, you will likely see with AMD's RX 7000 when this is released in 2023. And next up, really quickly, AMD went over their AMD Advantage. If you actually knew about this, they released this a little while back for laptops, and it's basically a higher end suggested specs or required specs for you to be able to call it an AMD Advantage laptop. And they're basically moving this to their desktop. So it makes it where you have these pre-built systems that effectively are trying their absolute best. So nothing is the bottleneck. It requires a certain level of CPU, certain level of GPU, memory that should work really, really well. Just basically a system that ensures everything's going to work really well. There shouldn't be very many bottlenecks in it or anything like that. That, of course, is interesting that AMD is going to be pursuing this. We'll have to see what ends up coming of it, but that was an interesting announcement. And finally, we have pricing. AMD announced that the RX 7900 XTX is priced at $999 and the 7900 XT is just $100 less at $899. And both GPUs will be available December 13th. Not only that, but during the Q&A session, they asked if AIB partners are going to be releasing their GPUs on December 13th as well. And from what we heard, I believe it was Scott Herkelman who answered, but effectively that is the plan. So AIB partner cards should be releasing that same day. So yeah, with all of that said, basically here is where I think we're at. They made it very clear that the 7900 XTX is not meant to challenge Nvidia's RTX 4090. That is very much unfortunate. They planned for this card to be in the $1,000 price bracket. And unfortunately, what that means is they aren't coming along with these massively cheap GPUs that are going to challenge way higher up GPUs, given the fact that Nvidia upped their price so significantly, but it does at least sound like, from what we're hearing, that it will likely challenge at least around the RTX 4080. And given the fact that the 4080 is $1199 versus $999, and if that is the case, that would obviously be a nice price drop. We're talking a couple $100 less for around the same performance, if that is what ends up happening. But unfortunately, at least from what we're seeing and what we're hearing, it does not look like this $1,000 GPU is going to be going against Nvidia's 4090, forcing them to massively lower their price or anything like that. Basically, these are certainly a massive jump in performance over last gen. Very impressive GPUs. We were looking at don't even know if I had the slide in here, and I'm really not sure why. They were looking at up to 1.7 times the performance compared to the 6950 XT. So definitely still a huge jump over last gen, but it doesn't look like we're going to be getting 4090 levels of performance for significantly less. With that said, there are certainly some features that AMD's RX 7000 GPUs are going to have, specifically, say, the DisplayPort 2.1 versus 1.4 in the RTX 4090, and then not having to deal with that new power connector, which obviously does seem to be causing some problems, whether it's the connector itself or it's the adapter. I'm not really sure. It's still sort of out on that. We'll find out obviously as things progress, but it isn't going to be a card that's set to challenge Nvidia's absolute best. So while that does it for today, what do you think about AMD's next-gen GPUs? Are you impressed, or are you a bit disappointed? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please subscribe, and as always, have a great day.